podcast, episode 97. I'm very excited to be with three colleagues in the art and climate movement, CHANTAL CHAGNON, Kevin JESUINO, and MELANIE KLOETZEL. And they will explain what they do because they do different things. But one of the things to do is work together. And I'm really happy that we had the opportunity to have a chat before. And I met some of you through SCALE, the National Climate Arts Movement. But I also had a chance to go on a long walk with Melanie just a few days ago in Montreal, and we got to know each other. And we realized that we all have affinities, and we're all suffering from relative isolation in this movement of climate emergency and the role of art. So why don't we just start with a quick round of introductions so that people can know who you are, where you are, maybe the territory where you are. Here in Ottawa, it's the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, or Algonquin Nation. And maybe I'll ask Chantal to start with a self-introduction, please.
Awesome. Tansei, Oki, bonjour, hello. I am Chantal Chagnon. I am Cree, Anishinaabe, and Métis from Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, which is in Treaty 6 territory. But I make my home and community now in Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis, which is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy of Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Sarsi Dene, also known as the Beaver people from Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda from Morley, which includes Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. We are also walking in the footsteps of Métis Region 3, which is why I'm proudly wearing my Métis sash to act as that bridge between Indigenous and non-Indigenous culture. And my role as an Indigenous artist and activist, this is just what we do. So in a lot of our languages, we don't actually have a word for art. It is just our way of being, our way of connecting, our way of sharing, our way of teaching. And I have been actively involved with environmental movements since a very, very young age, just because as an Indigenous woman, that is my path. You are one with the land. You're not above it or below it. You're part of it. We have so much to learn from creation. And if we keep stripping it away, we're taking away our knowledge with it, including that ancestral knowledge that we need to carry forward. I've been involved with causes like Murdered or Missing Indigenous Women, because you see that direct correlation between the way that Indigenous women are removed from the land, as well as the way that the land is treated. We treat the Mother Earth the way that we treat our Indigenous women, and we are definitely seeing those ramifications now, even though we've been warning about it for generations. I've also been involved with Idle No More back in 1992 until, well, still, and as well as different environmental and women's movements. I think it's really important that we see that connectivity between all social justice, including things like fighting fascism, because fascism is the reason we're in this mess. So yeah, hi, Miigwech, for having me today.
Thank you. Kevin, please.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name is Kevin JESUINO. I'm a queer interdisciplinary artist situated now in Miigwech, which is also known as Beaver Hills House, which is also known as Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, located in Treaty 6. This is traditional lands of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Sioux, Dakota Sioux, and also Métis Region 2, 3, and 4. I come to this work really grounded in the power that art can have for change. I have a bit of long history in arts for social change work, both in a theater, a movement arts, and a visual art practice. And have also been diving deeply into the work of somatics as a somatics practitioner. And I'm super curious, at least for myself, on how, the queries, as in both the question and also the queerness of nature, our bodies and the relationships we have with each other and nature. And I'm continuously investigating how situating what we do to our bodies, to our personal selves, to each other, and to the earth are all sort of the same thing, and so that's sort of the ground I come to when I approach this work. I'm also, along with Melanie, a co-founder, co-artistic director of Traction. And I guess we'll get more into what traction does later on. But very interested in how the role of art and specifically relational aesthetic or our relationships with each other play an important role in activating change.
That's great. Yeah, we will get back to traction. We'll get to the climate art web project and more. But now we'll hear from Melanie, please.
Hi there. Yes, I'm Melanie Klöetzel, and I am typically in Treaty 7 land in Mohkinstsis with Chantal there. But right now I'm currently joining from Tiohtià:ke in Montreal, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations. And this is something I'm really learning about both here and in general through my research right now. And Kevin and I are learning about the deepness of connection to place and to land by our work with Chantal here as well. So that's awesome. I am a professor at the University of Calgary in the dance division. My research area is in sight dance. So along with a colleague, Carolyn Pavlik, who's in the US, we co-authored or co-edited the first volume that addressed sight dance or site-specific dance. That was quite a long time ago, and that's continued to be my research focus. And part of the draw to that area is also because I've done a lot of research in environmental ethics. I have a degree also in environmental history. So I'm very interested in how our relationships to place have developed over time. And so because I'm also, coming from a perspective of dance and movement, I'm particularly interested in how the body relates to place. So that is my kind of starting point here. And I've been doing some deep dives into that relationship with my company, which is Klöetzel & Company, which I started in New York. My heavens. In the 1997, actually, so a long time ago, which has moved with me kind of across the US and then into Canada when I became a Canadian, which is very exciting for me. Although, of course, both countries have their supremacist histories, which we're obviously dealing with. And then, of course, yes, the traction beginning, which was a few years ago when Kevin and I first met, is kind of how we are launching into what we're going to talk about today. But I will leave it there.
Well, it's great to meet you on this episode. It so happens to be December 21st today, 2021. It's a solstice day, and I was, my wife and I and some neighbors in a distance way, we're going to do a little procession tonight in a park nearby. And it's always nice to go out into the land or go into a natural space. And although it's an urban space, it's a park, but it's lovely to do that and to connect our feet to the land and to the water and to the air. And so it's kind of a special day that it's solstice. I kind of enjoy that. So why don't you tell us, maybe Melanie, you can start just by telling us about the projects, maybe how you three came together, because the three of you are here today, and then branch off however you see fit. And I'd like to hear how from the others as well, and how you connected and why you're working together. I think that's an interesting story as well.
Kevin and I met in 2019 at the first kind of climate art gathering that we had in Calgary. Vicky Stroik and Ashley Bodegel, Patrick Close, and a couple other people had been in conversations for a while talking about, can we get people together to start talking about what it means to make art in relation to climate? And so at that first gathering, we were just kind of introducing ourselves to people. And then afterwards, I just kind of reached out to Kevin and I was like, hey, is there any way you would want to talk about doing something a little bit more dedicated in relation to climate art and, potentially forming a collective that actually addressed climate art and climate justice more directly. And I think, I was really inspired by what I had seen from the Critical Art Ensemble and the Yes Men and people like that. In terms of what they were able to accomplish through their art in relation to issues of policy and social change and everything like that. So that was an inspiration, and also just being more flexible about discipline. And since Kevin was coming from more of a theater background, but also someone who was really invested in kind of public space and the body for realizing change, I was excited to work with him. So luckily we kind of found our way through that. And then, since then we've been making a number of projects together, which, we can talk about more. But at some point last year, we were like, can we make a larger jump through Traction to something that becomes a bit more national? But we were also really invested in making sure that we were not doing this from a colonial perspective. And we were really invested in finding out what was happening through indigenous art in relation to climate. And we reached out to Chantal. We both actually kind of came to Chantal as like the perfect choice to start this work. And she has been the perfect choice. In part just because Chantal's somebody I've admired so much in the community for a long time, because her activism, it's just right up front, and she's just so generous with her knowledge as well. So we reached out to her to see if she would be interested in kind of, trying this out with us. What would it mean to create something which we're now calling the Climate Art Web, and to discuss what it would mean to reach out kind of nationally, but in a very from a decolonial frame. And so that's kind of where we started. And maybe I'll pass it off to the others if they want to add to that as well.
Well, since we were just talking about Chantal, maybe you could tell how you got involved and what your role is in the project.
Well, I never say no. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I've known Kevin for a bit, and we had done a couple of events together, and we've been involved just kind of passing in many, many different circles in Calgary. But I have been an activist in Calgary, and actually through my whole life, really, within Calgary and within Edmonton. But it just seemed like a natural fit when they came to me with what they were doing. I was like, this is awesome, because this is what a lot of other people are doing across Canada. And I think it's more important that we don't look at, our individual projects as individual projects, but coming together as more of a whole, and seeing it very much like the web. So whenever I approach a project, I do it from a traditional way of knowing background. So I look at how is it going to impact our future generations? Are my ancestors going to be proud of me when I step into this project? Am I gifting of my time and my knowledge in a good way? And I was just so thankful and humbled that they had come to ask me, because this is exactly what I love to do and how I love to share, and the people I love to bring together, because we are all here. We're all one. When we look at the 7 teachings, every time I come into a project, I look, okay, are they coming from a place of wisdom? Are they coming from a place of courage? Are they coming from a place of understanding and of honesty and of truth, of humility, and of love for Mother Earth, love for each other? And so when we look at those 7 teachings and those 7 values, I hope to bring that into every project that I'm part of. And I really have felt that spirit here within this project. And I've just been really humbled and thankful to be able to, bring that Indigenous perspective, but also I think sometimes when we're working through colonial institutions, or we're working through granting systems, or we have this way that we have always been brought up within the colonized system. So to be able to deconstruct that within a project as we move forward, I think has just been a beautiful gift. And I'm just thankful to be here and be part of it. I think it's important to live in gratitude every day.
Well, thank you. Kevin, what would you want to add to that gathering of voices and collaboration of you 3?
Well, I'm learning as I get older that I think the best way I can be an artist and a citizen is by leading from the middle, from humility, and from being the glue. And so I'm just humbled that I get to work with these 2 lovely humans and learn so much from both of them, and that I can act maybe as a bridge to sort of gather at least us three together, and then on a larger scale, hopefully all three of us can act as glue and also lead from that middle space to sort of gather people so that we can decolonize and all those 7 wisdoms that Chantal just listed, just come from a place where we are not only just challenging the structures and patterns that have been placed on top of us as a society, but like ground us in earth and in something that's a little bit more egalitarian and more caring of each other and of earth, and not something filled with ego and power. So yeah, it's just lovely working with these three.
So since you're speaking, Kevin, maybe you can explain to us what Climate Art Web is. What is it doing? What is the project? What do you want to achieve with it?
Yeah, this idea came, out of how can we gather voices. I'll speak just from my own perspective, and this is with my prior comment, that as I was doing work with in climate activist communities, but also climate arts artists, and seeing that everyone was sort of doing these things in very fractured ways, and I kept wondering, I'm like, there's got to be a way to move together or to be together in ways that allow us all to be different but moving in the same direction. And so I continuously kept bumping up to, again, these egos, and I guess it comes out of frankly, I think it comes out of feelings of there's not enough time, and if no one else is going to do it, then I alone will go out there and like scream and shout to make change. And then I just sort of I pulled back and I sort of looked at the larger landscape and saw that, well, there's all these activists and artists that are feeling the same way and not feeling like they're also part of something larger. And so these conversations happened with Melanie, and we started to just formulate this idea of like what could happen if we gathered something that was bigger, but also grounded in decolonization and indigenous knowledge, something that brought us back to and reminded us of the land that we're on. And so from that conversations, we got together and had conversations around what would this look like, and 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back and forth to sort of get to where we are now, where we're launching this national gathering. Now, again, everything is an iteration. So what we say today, we might find out in a few months that maybe that the approach needs to shift. So, but at the moment, right now, our intention is to gather artists from across Northern Turtle Island, and to in an online sort of showcase and gathering and conversation around what steps need to be taken, how, who's doing what, but then also to create some sort of resource that people can check in with to see what's happening. So in our heads, we'd like to imagine an online map that showcases all the ideas, artists, institutions, projects, programs that are around this idea of climate and art intersecting with each other. Again, and we would launch this resource at the online sharing that would happen in spring of 2022. But again, from that gathering, we might find out that we need to pivot and move somewhere else. But so we're trying to stay flexible. But right now, the hope is to sort of get to that place.
Well, I appreciate your efforts because there's definitely a need for that kind of, which is in fact why we created Scale, and we're working together with your project to align our efforts. But it's been hard with COVID for people to get together, and it will continue to be challenging. But there's so many connections to be made between artists who are working on similar issues, peer-to-peer learning, and also from other sectors. I'm really impressed by your project. You got funding, you're paying fees. So that's a good way to do it, to have a base and then to experiment in a way. You won't know until you ask really where artists are at, and you start looking at the work, and then one thing connects to another. Melanie, maybe you could tell us a bit more about the project, maybe things that Kevin hasn't covered yet. In terms, I know there's a call, and this podcast will go out in a few days, so there's still time for people to participate. I think you can maybe explain that part in terms of the curators that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think Kevin is right. I mean, we wanted to find some connections to others across the country that were really intersecting those ideas of climate art and climate justice and decolonization. But as we've done that, this whole notion of working on mapping and what mapping entails, and the concepts of regions and borders, all of those things are things that we're bringing up because it started from a place where we really just wanted to find other people who were making this kind of work, right? Who was making work that related to climate change? Who was making work about environmental justice? Who was talking about place-based care and relationship? So that was kind of where it started initially. And, as part of that, we wanted to think about what does it mean to be ecologically sensitive in terms of our art making? What does it mean to honor and acknowledge and learn from indigenous-led practices that work, in conjunction with the land, and those kinds of best practices that really could help facilitate the kind of art making we're talking about here. But in doing that, we were like, well, talking about an entire nation and what they're doing, it's very broad, obviously. So we were like, how are we going to break this down a little bit? And so we started talking about these kinds of regions, but we didn't want to do it on kind of colonial borders. So we started talking first about ecozones and, bioregions, that whole notion of like ecologically centered, basically borders. But also we were really interested in working with Chantal because we wanted to know what kind of indigenous knowledge there was about thinking about region and regionality. So that's been part of the project too, is kind of decolonizing the whole notion of mapping and regions. And so we are talking now about, possibly 7 regions across the country, but that they'll be somewhat flexible and that the borders are based. I mean, Chantal can speak more to this, but based on like notions of where river systems were and hunting and trapping lines. And so it's kind of a radical way of thinking about, how to divide up the country so that people start to identify around maybe a region that is, not associated with the same kind of colonial borders. So what we're looking for really is to find people in each of those regions who we're calling them curators. They're also researchers, kind of, who are hopefully going to act as liaisons, making sure that they're finding those climate artists in their communities that are doing that work in relation to environmental justice and sustainability, et cetera. So that is a paid position that we are asking for people. So we want a curator, certainly from each of the regions, and we definitely want indigenous curators if possible, and so that indigenous knowledge is a huge part of that. And so the curation involves making sure that you're reaching out to people of different artistic disciplines. It's not a singular discipline that we're talking about here. Also interdisciplinary work. And certainly we're trying to learn about best practices in terms of, ecologically inspired ways of creating work that are from all different cultures, right? So that's a huge part of the project as well. So So yeah, if people are interested in becoming a curator, we are the January 15th, we're saying, is the deadline. It's a very, very short, simple application process on our website, which is www.caw-wac.com. So you can find out more information there about doing that kind of curator position. But we're also interested, of course, in finding which are the artists that are making the work. So you can also enter your information on the website if you're making climate art and you'd like us to highlight you as well on whatever kind of map it is that we end up creating online. So that gives you a little bit more sense of it, maybe.
Yeah, and that's valuable because there isn't a central place now. I know there are other research projects in the works, and eventually we'll have a better map of who's doing what. But it's appreciated that you're doing that, and I think it's a nice opportunity for dialogue and for regional conversations. And Chantal, I'm really interested in this notion. I mean, in fact, it blew me away when you first told me about this idea of mapping differently, either by region or by indigenous nation or indigenous language, because that changes a lot in how we see ourselves, how we see, the provinces or the colonial structure. So, Chantal, how does that work in terms of mapping differently according to indigenous geo-regions or language-based groups?
Well, a lot of our traditional ways of knowing and a lot of our language is tied into the land itself. And so when we were looking at the map, everything's kind of been broken up, and a lot of our nations have been stuck on reserves, which reduced the amount that we could flow, the amount that we could connect to the land, and the amount that we could, hunt and fish in our traditional ways, which is the way that we would connect. And it was so tied into culture as well. And unfortunately, this is our colonial history, where you put people on a reserve when they're used to movement, you starve them out, essentially. And so I wanted to look at that and deconstruct that and look at how language is directly connected to the land and how people are connected to the land before colonization. And the map looks really, really different than the way it's wedged together now. And I really wanted to kind of pick that apart and dig into that. So I've been talking to different elders and different knowledge keepers in different parts of Turtle Island to just really get more of a sense of history and a sense of connection to the land and a connection to the animals and the plants. I carry a lot of traditional teachings when it comes to different plant medicines, but specifically of the prairies. And so to really understand where some of those other medicines have come from, and to really recognize that we have a lot more in common than we do differences. But taking it out of that realm of segregation and putting us in little boxes, and knowing that when we look at borders, they weren't rigid. They used to flow. They used to ebb and flow like the rivers. They used to ebb and flow like the ocean. They used to ebb and flow with the seasons and with the way that the animals move. And so when we were looking at the map, I wanted to really consider that. How are we going to ebb and flow with the artists we get, with the land itself? The land is continuously changing. And to have those rigid borders, it didn't really make any sense. I mean, it never made any sense, several hundred years ago. Why would it make sense now? But that knowledge that is so intrinsic and deeply entrenched in the land itself and in the language, and that connection to the land, I think was so important to understand, to highlight, and to really be flexible around. With our colonial structures, everything is very rigid. Like, you have a very linear way of thinking, and we forget about that cyclical way of bringing everything together within the circle. And I really wanted to bring that forth. And we've had really amazing conversations around it. And it's really incredible when you start to talk about things or look at things from a different perspective, how not only does it enhance your artistic practice because it makes you more creative and, more open to the world around you and more aware and observant, not only of yourself and their surroundings, but of Mother Earth and the lessons she has for us, but also just recognizing those colonial structures that are within our own minds, and how can we break those down just like we're breaking the ones down on our lands.
Well, we've been working in scale with a document called Towards Braiding that's written by Elwood Jimmy and Vanessa Andreotti, and it's been difficult to decolonize, or it's even to start decolonizing, because there's so many systems that are ingrained in our minds and bodies. But it is possible, and I appreciate this project because you're literally remapping the country and allowing artists, as you say, to enjoy another look. Maybe it's an old look in the sense that it's the way things were, but it's also the way things are now, and the way things need to be, where we are going as communities of people living on Turtle Island. So I appreciate everything you've said. I'm sorry I can't see you because we're having a bit of a connectivity issue here today, but it's lovely to hear you and to hear that you're trying to connect with your peers, and also just get that experience of I'm doing this. Who else is doing it? I'm enjoying, exploring a certain issue. The conversation I had yesterday with Joan Sullivan, she said we're not doing art about climate change. We are climate change, and she was quoting Chantal Bilodeau, and that's kind of interesting, right? It's like artists are flipping it around and saying, we don't have to see it as, a problem so much. It is a problem, but it's more like what we've done, and how can we together move away from the destruction, from the self-destruction, essentially, that the Western society has done. So anyway, we're into 30 minutes of this rich conversation. I want to give you each another opportunity to say whatever you want, because I would love to hear more from you, and whatever topic maybe we haven't covered so far, or you'd like our listeners to hear about, knowing that we can never have a complete conversation because there's so much that you're working on. And I think we'll want to maybe have a debrief after your event, maybe in the summer of 2022, and see what you've learned, see what this has given, what kinds of seeds are sprouting from what you're planting in the spring of 2022. So I'll start with Kevin. Just what else would you like to share with us today?
Well, Claude, to go off what you were just saying right there is like, I mean, this is deeply at the bottom of like what my curiosities are, is how are we actually harming ourselves? Yes, we're harming the earth. Yes, we're harming the earth. The earth will be resilient. The earth will keep going. We've done harm to it, but in doing harm, we've also done so much harm. We're harming ourselves ultimately. And so it's like, how many times does somebody have to, be told that they should stop smoking or do more walking or eat better? Like there's a thing of like, when do you start to consider yourself as not only the problem, but also the solution, that you're actually part of a system. You are the earth. You are an extension of the earth. And so, I'm curious about that. And I think that in building that empathy around, I am earth, I am an extension of the earth, then I think that's, ultimately what the role of artists are in this whole climate art world stuff is that I think that arts allow the hands and heart to speak and to shut off the brain. Yes, we can come up with creative ways to figure out ways forward, but I think that ultimately what experiencing climate art, and the climate art that I'm seeing that really resonates with me, at least, is work that puts my feelings at the forefront of my experience, that it's experiential. And I think that it also helps, as we've as Melanie and I have done, working with scientists to try and figure out what role does art play in communicating science, because I think academia, and that's a whole other colonized problem, but I think academia has really there's been a huge divide, and it's done a disservice to itself, frankly, the academia world. But there's been a huge divide in translating work or translating scientific data into the hands of the general person in the world. And media gets all mixed up in there too, right? So I think that art allows us to be able to translate these complex problems into something that comes down to feelings, which are complex, but are not linear, and allow us to then move from that space in multiple directions, but all sort of doing similar work, right? So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Claude.
No, you're welcome. Melanie, what are your, I guess, parting thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say a couple things. I mean, I've been involved in, work with Extinction Rebellion as well over the past few years, and this question of what is actually making the largest impact and which lever do you pull is something that I think we're all trying to figure out, right? I mean, certainly that you guys are talking about that in scale and, our efforts through the Climate Art Web. I mean, obviously we're moving along similar trajectories here, but I think part of the question, right, is what it is that art can do in this moment of time in terms of the climate emergency. And I think, we know how from art to like represent themes, right? We understand that concept of kind of thematic addressing of an idea through artwork, right? But I think that, this whole idea of how do you vision something new, right? That kind of decenters the human potentially and prioritize other ways of knowing that are more than human. I think that's, these are questions that we're starting to really ask. And for me, like right now, I'm kind of doing a deep dive into my own discipline of dance and, but also, pretty much any artistic discipline and figuring out what does it mean to really create something that is anti-colonial, because that's the only way we'll start to embrace something that might be a new story, a new idea about relating to place that is not a colonial relationship. And I mean, I'm trying to, as a settler, as a white settler, right? I'm really trying to be accountable for my own kind of culpability in the system and my own kind of ontological habits around this. But that idea of story and finding a story and an embodied practice that starts to kind of realize and embed a new story in ourselves physically is something that I'm really invested in. While at the same time trying to be really aware of my position. I mean, there's a lot of research. I mean, yes, academia has its significant problems, which we could go into in more depth, but I've been doing a lot of great reading from Heather Davis Fish, who's at University of Fraser Valley, and Dylan Robinson, who's, this amazing Indigenous scholar. And, they're putting a lot of brakes on things that people are doing and saying, hey, you can't just like run away with our Indigenous knowledge and do whatever you want with it. So Heather Davis Fish calls it settler creep, which I really love. And so I think, yeah, it's a really good one. So I'm really trying to be aware of that, right? I don't want to be creeping in. I want to find what Sarah Hunt, she's another amazing Indigenous scholar who's at University of Victoria. She talks about it. Can we find ways of doing solidarity practices, right, between settler communities and Indigenous communities, for example, that are really centering Indigenous knowledge, but not just using it for your own benefit. So, I mean, I think what I really love about this project is that, working with Chantal is starting to consider what is a solidarity practice? What could it mean to be in solidarity with and be anti-colonial about something, without that settler creep? So those are things that, on a larger scale that I'm trying to work on right now for myself. And I'm really glad about this project that starts to walk that path, basically.
Well, it sounds like a new vocabulary is being developed, that I'd never heard that term, settler creep, solidarity practices, both ways to describe new ways of working or things not to do. I sometimes insert previous excerpts from previous episodes, and I will insert here my conversation with Keith Barker from episode 91, because he talked about storytelling, and he's the artistic director of Native Earth Performing Arts in Toronto. And it's an interesting sort of complement to what you just said.
So to me, it's like artists being right in on the conversation, being present, and actually like pushing the agenda is absolutely the thing we need to be. That's where we need to be. And too many politicians and policy and all that stuff, you're watching that stuff like fail right now. And to put artists in spaces with community members telling their stories and talking about the crisis that's happening and engaging people, that's the power of theater. That's the power of art. That to me is the thing that's going to push people to make changes or to start talking or to enter into dialogue. Because right now we have a left and a right that isn't going to speak. They don't like each other. They don't like their politics. But you get them in a room together and they actually break bread and start having food. They realize that both their kids go to the same school. They both drive the same car. They both love hockey. If we start like finding those connections through art, then they're going to engage. And it doesn't matter if it's an indigenous artist telling that story or, another IBPOC person or anybody else. If you're telling a good story, people are going to be engaged and it'll compel you to want to do something.
So, Chantal, I'll offer you le mot de la fin, the final word, so to speak, at least for today. Is there anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
Definitely. As an Indigenous storyteller, story keeper, knowledge keeper, I think that's essential. So stories are how we communicate to each other. That's, how we bring relationships. And I think sometimes when we think of the word relationship, we think person to person. But in my traditional practices, in many traditional practices, when we say all my relations, it's not just the two-leggeds, which is us, the people, but it's our connection to the animals and recognizing that the harm that we're doing to the earth, it's directly affecting the plants and the animals and, the crawlers and the swimmers, but it's also affecting Mother Earth. And that's our direct connection to it. We're breaking the circle. And I think we need to look at the relationships that we need to have with Mother Earth and with the stones and with the water and with the air and recognize that every time we breathe, that's part of a relationship. When we look at artistic practice, I always say traditional Indigenous knowledge. I mean, we were the prime example of what sustainability should be, because we only take what we need from the land and we always return what we don't use. Now we're in this throwaway economy. We never had garbage men back in the day, so we had to use every aspect and everything that we took from the land in a respectful way, because we knew if we took the first thing that we saw, that could have been the last thing. And we're starting to recognize that now more and more and more. There are so many plants that are going extinct, so many animals that are going extinct. And as part of our artistic practice, I mean, we're losing so much traditional knowledge within those plants and within those animals, and within those connections and those relationships that we could have had the opportunity to build. This project actually gives us the ability to dive into that, to dig into that, to look at relationship from an artistic perspective, because sometimes we'll read words, but they won't really make a lot of sense to us. But there's something about art that makes you feel deeply. It makes you feel connected to each other. And this is why we never really had a word for art, because it was just our way for relationships to build and to develop. This is our way for stories to be shared. It's our way to impact and share what is happening so that we can make the world a better place for all of our future generations. I think it's so important that when we look at each other, to recognize that we're all in this together. Like, there's no other boat, there's no other planet. And so we have to recognize the relationships that we have to build with each other to make it a better world for all of our future generations. Because as long as we're siloed, we're losing so much of knowledge that we could share with each other to make those connections deeper and to really come up with solutions that not only can we feel deeply within each other, but also to make that the world better. I mean, we have the opportunity to do that, but we can't do that if we're siloed. We can't do that if we're apart. We all have so many things that we can bring to the table. And with traditional ways of knowing, we always know that we are all in a circle. Mother Earth is a circle. This is why our planet is round. Grandmother Moon and Grandfather Sun, they work together in harmony. And so it teaches us to honor that masculine and feminine, our mind as well as our heart, because they need to be balanced to be able to bring forward and connect in a deep and meaningful way. But within the circle, everyone's voice is important. And as long as we have this siloing within our society, as long as we have this have and have not mentality, we are missing so many voices that could be the change. Art gives us that opportunity to amplify those voices. And I think it's important that now, more than ever, that we amplify those marginalized voices, those racialized voices, those voices that are being directly affected with what's happening around Mother Earth. It is so, so important that we honor each other and build those relationships for all of our future generations. But I'm just really, really thankful and humbled to be here. I, as a two-spirit woman, I think it's really important that we continue on that path of balance. I don't like the word reconciliation because it's very short-sighted. I think we need to put it into action. So reconciliation is the way that we can move forward together. And the artists get it. We're working towards changing hearts and minds in different ways because everybody is going to be impacted differently. And we need to just maintain and honor everyone's voice within the circle. So my spirit name is She, who sings and dances with spirits in a storm. And this is the biggest storm that Mother Earth has ever experienced. And so I'm thankful and humbled to be here, raising my voice and dancing alongside. Miigwech. Hi.
Well, thank you all very much for taking the time to share your experience, knowledge, emotions, and your good work. I wish you well, and we will work together, and we will talk again. Thank you very much.
Hi. Thank you.